Welcome to Fire University. This is a podcast dedicated to fire ecology and management within the Natural Resource University Podcast Network. My name is Dr. Marcus Lashley. I'm a wildlife biologist, an assistant professor of disturbance ecology at the University of Florida, and a lifelong hunter that's passionate about wildlife conservation and management. In this podcast, I will interview scientists and professionals, not only on the latest research in fire ecology, but also about their experiences, in hopes that you as the listeners can learn why fire ecology is important and also how you can use it to meet your natural resource management goals. So let's get to the burning questions in Fire University. All right, welcome back everybody to Fire University. Today, I'm talking with Zach Prusak and Andy Rappe, and really excited to have these guys on. They're going to talk about some really interesting things related to burning and some of the things that they think about when they're igniting fires, maybe a little bit on planning, the kinds of tools maybe they're using, and also we really wanted to focus on how important it is to collaborate across state and federal agencies and with private landowners. And we collectively all have very similar objectives and how we can better meet those objectives by working together. So how are you guys doing?
Doing good.
Doing good. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us on the show.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you, and really appreciate you guys coming on, and glad that I'm able to get some people with a really long history of using fire in different contexts. I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say about that. So, Zach, do you want to start and tell us about yourself?
Sure, and I think you just called me old by saying long history, and I appreciate that.
That was not my intent.
So, yeah, I have been working in the field of fire management for about 34 years now, and I really had no idea that I'd be doing this for a living because I studied ants at the University of Central Florida, and my plan was to be the next E.O. Wilson. But my very first job at the Wakawa Springs State Park, my boss, Walt Thompson, said, "You want to get on a fire?" And I was like, sure. Because I had only read about fire ecology in my classes at UCF and read the Myers and Ewell book and all that. And so to see it firsthand and to be a part of this process just blew me away. And I still remember that to this day, my very first fire. And that took me on this path to working for the state, working for Brevard County, working for actually the government of Walt Disney World, Reedy Creek Improvement District, doing fire on Disney property, and now to where I am with the Nature Conservancy, serving as the Florida Fire Manager. And it's been a great ride, 500 plus fires in my career, and lately focusing more on instruction, teaching, outreach, doing podcasts like this, and really trying to synthesize what I've learned over many mistakes over many years, and really enjoying seeing the new generation of fire leaders and practitioners from all walks of life. So yeah, it's been, I never thought I'd be here, and this is just one of the most interesting and incredible things I've done.
Yeah, well, I didn't realize you had such a diversity in your background working for all those different entities over the years. So that's really great. You bring a lot of experience from many different perspectives. That's really cool. So, Andy, you want to tell us about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Andy Rappe, and I've been in fire for about 15 years. And I have a different story than Zach's. That's one of the cool things about fire. There's no one path to get where you're at. I started out as a film student. My undergrad was in film, and I wanted to make nature documentaries. That was my deal. And got out of school and took a summer job as a park ranger in Georgia State Parks, and they did a burn. And it's just something went off in my head, I really, really like this. And this is...
You're a pyromaniac. I think that's what you switched on the pyro button.
Yeah, there was something about it. It's this cool mix of kind of art and science and labor all rolled into one thing with this really satisfying end result. So that was just magic for me. So I went from that job and worked on fire crews for the Nature Conservancy for several years, and then eventually made my way to the University of Florida and worked at my current location, which is the Ordway Swisher Biological Station. We're a field station. So I did a lot of burning there, and then in the last 4 or 5 years, became a burn boss and started bossing burns and doing that. And similar to that, Zach really fell in love with the teaching aspect and training aspect, because you can't do this yourself. Like it's very, very challenging. It's a cool coordination between a lot of people. So that's how I got to be talking with you today.
So both of you have used fire for a long time and with many different perspectives, it sounds like, and you're working with, I guess, similar objectives in some cases and differing objectives in others. So I was really curious, talking to you guys before we got on the show. You were talking about how important it was, I guess, for different entities to work together. So do you guys want to talk about that for a few minutes, just like your experiences collaborating and what kinds of collaborations there have been, and how you facilitate that community, I guess, to work together?
That's a great question, which could lead to hours of discussion.
Well, I don't know if we have that long, but
Well, that's in the extended version of the podcast. Become a Patreon subscriber, and
yeah, there you go.
it's I love what Andy said, because one person. I mean, technically, you could perhaps one person light a fire, but this is such a collaborative process, the act of setting fire to the woods for ecological and other reasons. And so it's a community of fire that really is built upon everyone's desire to do this thing together. One agency, one organization doesn't have enough staff to do what they need to do. And so by necessity, we have to work together. And so things like fire councils, we always recommend people to join a fire council, because during the meetings, you get to actually talk to people face to face. And everyone there has different reasons why they want to use fire as a tool, with agriculture or hunting or cattle or ecological reasons or fuel reduction. But the bottom line is that the art and science and the tool of fire is the same. And so working together, we can do something that individuals have a hard time doing. And so attending the same trainings together, seeking out a prescribed burn association, which we have in North Florida. We hope to expand that. As college students, it's right off the bat. I've worked with students from University of Florida, University of Idaho, and they seek out a community of fire practitioners and like-minded people. And so I think it's a mindset, but there are ways to work together that are, again, fire councils and such that can facilitate that.
Yeah. So when you're talking about like the prescribed fire council in Florida, I think most states have their own council, right? Maybe not all of them, but most of them do.
Most do, and that's an amazing success story, which I say, I give full credit to individuals who, again, want to work together and start fire councils. It started with the South Florida Interagency Fire Council a long, long time ago in the 70s, and now Florida has 3. California has one in North California, which is amazing. Linnea Quinn Davidson, who runs that fire council, is phenomenal and also demonstrates the influence and power of a very determined individual to get changes done to benefit fire practitioners. And so, yeah, most states have them. There is a coalition of fire councils, and that's a website where you can go to and look at the updates for fire councils. And by unifying fire practitioners from California to Maine to Florida, we also strengthen the message of why we need to do fire. And so, again, from very local individuals to a nationwide community of fire practitioners, it's a very powerful thing.
Mm-hmm. So just talking about one of the ones in Florida, who is able to join? Is this something that's specific to agency professionals in the field, or is it accessible to the general public? Who has access to that?
It's accessible to anyone who wants to come and learn about fire. We have at our Central Florida Fire Council, we have everyone from the federal fire folks from DOD all the way to cattle ranchers, because again, the tool of fire from a legal standpoint is the same, across all. And so we don't restrict anyone from attending, and there is no fee to attend our meetings. We feel that getting the message of fire as a unifying tool is critical. So yes, anyone can attend.
Yeah, so that sounds like a really great opportunity, whether you're a private landowner or an agency professional, or in some other way linked to or interested in fire. That's a great resource, maybe to get the latest research on fire, rule changes, basic information that you need to learn how to implement a fire, or collaborate, from a collaborative standpoint, a great place to network with other professionals to try to get on the same page and help one another. You mentioned the Prescribed Burn Association. That is also another opportunity like that, which is typically more specific, I guess, to the general public, right? Where most of the people involved in that, or it's targeted towards getting people in the community together to help each other burn. Is that is that the way you would characterize that?
Yes. So a Prescribed Burn Association, there's a great number of them in the Midwest. They are geared toward private landowners who want to share resources, staff, perhaps join together to seek out grants for equipment that can be shared. And so they're a very deliberate acting group of folks who have a vested interest in getting their land burned by utilizing, their neighbors or people that want to help. So we have one in North Florida, and we hope to expand that to others in Florida.
Right. And I know I'm aware of a few other ones in other states. There's a couple that I am familiar with in the Carolinas, and then at least one in Mississippi, I believe, that I've learned about. But yeah, it sounds like wherever people are, there's probably a couple of different opportunities for them to help build a collaborative community with other people that are like-minded and want to use fire for some reason or another, and probably plenty of opportunity to learn and even get some experience burning with other experienced burners through these programs.
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing. And sorry, Andy, I've got a lot of coffee. Um, it's when we talk about what makes a really good burner, and again, I emphasize what Andy said about art. To do this well, there's so many facets to understand, whether it's ecology, the strategy of doing fire, but it really is a mentoring. I mean, I was mentored by amazing fire leaders, Rosie Mulholland and Walt Thompson and others, and I learned. And so these communities of fire are also very important, because we need everyone who wants to do this, whether you're on the fire line or leading a fire, you've got to have practice. And so mentoring, so these Prescribed Burn Associations, fire councils, trainings, they introduce people to each other, and we encourage folks as best you can to volunteer and help each other out, because this really is a learn as you burn field. And the more you do, the more you'll know.
Right. I get feedback commonly from our listeners and just people who have seen things that I'm doing as someone who's in academia. I don't get out and get that practice like you guys do. But I commonly get those kinds of questions. Where can I get more information? How can I get training? How do I essentially build, or where are the resources to build this kind of community to get comfortable using fire? A lot of people contact me that are really interested in using it on their property. Of course, normally they're interested in managing wildlife when they're contacting me, but a lot of them want to know where do you go to find those kinds of resources. So glad you're able to talk about that. Andy, I know you're I guess your role in fire management is a little bit different, but I think we could probably all agree that collaborative nature, you're burning not only to manage resources on Ordway and maybe in other places as well, but you're also collaborating with the university people like me pretty commonly to implement fires. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Real quick, before I forget, we're recording this during the pandemic. So if all that sounded like a lot with the fire council meetings and the prescribed burn associations and the acronyms and all that, the barrier to entry is pretty low right now. A lot of these prescribed fire council meetings are online. So if you don't want to drive, or that's just a little bit too much for where your interest or capabilities are right now, it's worth Googling and seeing what's in your area, and you can hop on one online, and
Yeah, so you can potentially attend the meeting virtually.
yeah, yep. So that's a silver lining to the pandemic, to where you can check that out. So I'd encourage folks to look into that. But to answer your question, yeah, Zach's absolutely right. You're looking at different groups of people. So you need different amounts of people depending on your burn objectives and your comfort level and how prepared the unit is, or the block, or whatever you want to call it, the area you're burning. There's a lot of different variables there, but I'll throw out 9 as a good number. Say we're burning 100 acres out here on the station, and it's a reasonable day and the fuels are low. 9 people would be pretty good. I probably got about half that on any given day to get it done. And it's literally dependent on which way the wind's blowing, right? So it may change that morning. So we do a couple things. We keep a list of fire trained volunteers that may want to come out, fire trained students or graduate students that are working on a project, that have training and can come out, and then also different agency folks. So these might be local folks at a state park up the road, or the state fish and wildlife agency, or anybody that's in our area. And we kind of we trade social capital, we trade labor back and forth. So we might have a couple folks go and burn with them, and then a couple folks come and burn with us. And it's a cool thing, and it benefits everybody, because all these are a little different. You got a burn boss by the ant guy, and you got a burn boss by the film student, right? So they're going to be a little bit different flavors, and you go to different sites and you get these other experiences of how the burns run, and then also the fuels and everything like that. But the basic framework's the same to do it safely and meet ecological objectives. But it makes us all kind of stronger by sharing the burn-in and the area and things like that. And we're all in the same boat. I don't think you'll ever have anybody on your show that's like, yeah, I got all the people I need to burn, and it's wonderful. If it is,
Right.
let me know.
I think Zach said it earlier. We need to train and get as many people burning as possible, because we just don't have enough people to get it all done, which is one of the reasons that this collaboration is so important. Probably something that people don't think about as often as they should, is how important building this community and having these people that you can rely on, and they can rely on you to come help.
Yeah, in Florida, just to use our state as the example, we've got, let's see, with about 34 million acres, our state is in size. 9 million of it is public lands. There's millions of acres that are private that need fire. And so if you look at that and look at it from an ecological standpoint, where we are constantly tweaking the needs of these habitats, from sandhill, longleaf pine, scrub, and all of those habitats that need fire at a certain regime, that changes the ecological goals from a fire perspective. 10, 15, 20 years ago for some of these are different than today. And so if you look at all of what we have to do and what the public has invested, just from a public standpoint, all the lands that we have, most of it needs fire. And the Florida Forest Service, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and the Park Service, those 3 state agencies alone manage close to 4.5 million acres of land. And it's so we have to collaborate. We are the Red Queen, always running as fast as we can just to stay in place. And so we need to encourage more people to burn. But then the conundrum is, we have 21 million people that live in Florida, and that number is not going to go down. So we have challenges to burn. So we have to work together. Our state laws, the statute and the rule that go to open burning, are great. I mean, this is a very good state to safely burn as a certified prescribed burn manager. So we cannot do this stuff alone, and we have so much to do, and collaboration is the way to go.
Yeah, that's great. One thing that you mentioned earlier, it's not just about having the different people involved. It's not just about having enough bodies, warm bodies, as one of my former advisors used to say. We just need enough warm bodies to do this. So it's not just about that. There's also opportunity potentially for people to share tools, for instance, resources, other tangible resources like that can help each other accomplish the burning. So I think that's a really cool idea that that opportunity is probably available to you wherever you are. You probably have some resources like that are available that you can become a part of that community and utilize that potentially, like you were saying with the prescribed burn associations, pooling resources or even seeking out funding to help buy resources to accomplish some of those goals could be you know really helpful to decreasing that barrier to private landowners that are trying to get involved, or maybe some other organizations that are trying to build up their capacity to get burning done. One thing I wanted to ask you guys, that you both have such a tremendous amount of experience. What are some of the things that you've learned over the years that you really feel like that experience has just, we'll use a pun, burned into your brain that you have to think about when you're lighting some of these fires?
I've got a couple. I'll stall for you, Zach.
Fantastic.
I love asking questions like that, so you can just go wherever you want with it.
So I burn primarily at Ordway in longleaf pine, wiregrass, we call them sandhill type habitat or fuels, depending on who you're talking to, if you call it habitat or fuels. But if you picture a tall grass prairie out west, or like an African savanna, and then it happens to have pine trees, sprinkled in there, that's kind of what you're burning. So I'm in that a lot, and this stuff needs fire every couple of years. Textbook will tell you every 2 to 4 years to burn in this stuff. A little more, a little less, depending on your needs. So I've been here at my site over 10 years. So some of these I've burned 2 or 3 times. Same chunk of ground. They're all different. It can be the same season. There's so many different variables. So you think you know it, and you got a good idea of what it's going to do, but there's always something to learn every single time.
When you're saying you think you know what it's going to do, are you talking about like you're lighting the fire and you're expecting it to behave in a particular way when you're doing it, and that changes depending on where you're at, even though it may be similar conditions and similar system? Is that what you mean? Or do you mean the outcome, like how the community responds to it, the plant community and the wildlife community?
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, the behavior, the day of, what's the fire actually going to do? What's the weather doing that's driving that fire? What are the condition of the fuels doing that's driving that fire?
Sure.
How are your techniques different, in terms of how you're lighting it, how you're using that drip torch or ignition device to get it on the ground. So that's all different. And then to your other point, which I wasn't thinking until you said it, Marcus, was, how it comes back is different. How the vegetation comes back, how that fuel structure has changed with subsequent fires. Have you burned up all the mid-story stuff,
Right.
and was that your objective, and did you achieve that? So it's always a little different, which keeps it really exciting. But it also means there's always something to learn, which is really cool. So that's, I'll tell people it's like driving a lot. There's kind of this bell curve where you're like, okay, I got this, I got it figured out, and then something happens, and you're like, oh, this is, yeah, just because I'm used to doing this doesn't mean it's not dangerous, or that there's not a lot of different variables. So I'll often tell people that's kind of how I think about it. It's can become a routine, but it's always kind of fresh and often surprising. So it's
That's a good analogy. So, yeah, that's a really good point. I can kind of reiterating some of the other things we've been talking about is, finding a way to get experience and get practice is really important so that you can basically become adaptable, situationally adapt to what's going on and react to that, I guess, when you're looking at, in real time at a fire, you need to be able to situationally adapt to deal with whatever situation arises. But also, you may want to adjust your burning technique, whether it be the way that you're lighting the fire or how frequently you're lighting it or what time of the year, that sort of thing. Based on your experience with a burn block could even change.
And I think, Marcus, for me, and I'll add what I think some of the biggest things I've learned over 34 years of doing this is that always plan your fire for the worst possible outcome. And, I've been on fires where the burn boss says, "Oh, this is easy. We'll be done by noon. We'll be out of here so you can binge watch all the Mandalorian episodes you didn't miss, you didn't see." And so don't ever assume any fire that you're on is going to be easy or straightforward. And I love Andy's analogy of driving. We do get into this mindset where success breeds confidence, which is good because everyone who's out there needs to be confident. But also, you don't want to be too cocky on your past successes where near misses might be chalked up to, all right, that's wow, I kind of survived that. I'm just going to keep on going. I sometimes obsess too much about successes and how that breeds complacency.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that may be heretical on this podcast is I have learned not to get too focused on perfect ecological outcomes on fires. In my time in Brevard County, where I did the bulk of my fire planning and implementation in really challenging urban intermix and interface fires, we had very specific outcomes based on single species, which were impossible to meet in some of the fires. And so what we learned is that you had areas that you could burn, but you had to do a lot of prep and it wasn't perfect ecologically. But what those fires resulted in is the acceptance of fire countywide and statewide. So in other words, you demonstrated your proficiency in doing fires that the public can drive by and see. And it was, for example, these were scrub fires that, had to be a certain way for many different species. Well, some of those units, we just couldn't do it because of how all those species evolved. And so what I learned was every unit is different. And it was almost the greater good of accepting fire and then making sure that whoever the next fire manager was or land manager that we handed that off to could continue to use that tool and not be so narrowly focused that every single parcel of a certain habitat had to be a certain way. That's just not true. And we often will use all different kinds of fire techniques out of season, in season, to achieve a goal that the entire property or region of multiple landowners can meet. And so I never got that at the beginning. I always was very focused. Well, this is habitat X. It has to be a certain condition. And it's not true.
Right.
But if we got to a point where there were examples of that habitat, large scale overall, then that's, it is all about handing our torch metaphorically and literally off to the next generation of folks when we're gone and give them the most flexibility they can have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really cool point that you may not necessarily accomplish specifically a textbook version of your objective, but there's still some other intangible things that could come from that, just from society seeing fire, for instance, and accepting that that's a part of the system and needs to be done. That's a real benefit that could help us utilize fire more often in communities or in Florida and much of the southeast and eastern United States. A lot of the communities that we're managing do need fire to some extent to manage a lot of different species or assemblages, and just having public buy-in for that is pretty important even. So I think that's a really good point. So both of you have sort of alluded to the planning process when you're, how important that part of it. So before you ever go out and light anything on fire. So I was just curious if you could give us some examples of what that process looks like, and maybe how you might tweak things depending on what your objective is. So if you, for instance, have an objective to regenerate longleaf on this one stand versus manage for gopher tortoise habitat, or deer and turkeys, or whatever you're managing for. I'm sure you guys probably have some experience managing for different specific objectives. I was just curious, how might you change that planning process, and the way that you're planning to implement fire to address those things?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. So I'll use the example of if you're reintroducing fire to an area, because most people are in a situation like me where you burned the thing 2 years ago, so you're going back to it. So assuming you have no fire history on it, I tend to be a little more cautious with that first burn. I'll call it a reintroduction burn. So you may not want to do that in Florida. Our wildfire season is more towards May, for example. So that's when it probably would have naturally burned, with a lightning strike in May. I may not want to roll the dice and see how that goes. I might want to kind of ease fire back into an area. So you would want to, burn that potentially a little cooler. It's kind of a little counterintuitive to say you want a cooler fire, a little bit of an oxymoron, right? But you do. You can have a hotter fire or not. You can turn your oven on high or low, right?
Sure.
So I would make sure the fuels are a little more wet, and there's different ways to quantify that. And then I would also pick a season. I wouldn't do it in that springtime burn.
Okay, so if you're, because of the fuel buildup of not having fire in the system for a while, it sounded like you could adjust. Maybe you don't time it the same. So if you were looking at more of an ecologically relevant, you might want to do it in May, but not necessarily on the first fire or even the first couple of fires. Maybe you might move that to the dormant season, like a February fire. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, you would more what I would call dormant season. So somewhere like that. We typically don't burn in the fall, but more January, February, something like that, and kind of ease fire back in there. So there are ways you can light it to keep the flame lengths lower, and to one of my mentors called it peeling the layers of an onion. You're kind of just peeling off a layer of that fuel each time, and it may take several of those burns.
Yeah, and you can target a time of the year, also weather conditions. It sounded like you could try to have a little higher fuel moisture and probably higher relative humidity, maybe lower wind speeds, those types of things. Or is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's exactly. And you may break it into a smaller area. Say you were going to burn 20 acres, maybe you're going to burn 5, and maybe you're going to let that fire really take its time and get through there, and kind of burn up some of those fuels while it's wet and cool. And then the next time you go through, you've got a different scenario to burn it the next time. And then
So you might even be using firing techniques like backing fire or spot fires, those sorts of those techniques, and even less aggressively than you might if it's a stand that you've been burning for the last 30 years.
Yeah. And then on the other end of that, say you've got something that for whatever reason, you've got really wide fire breaks around it. Let's say it's a peninsula with lakes on 3 sides, and it's full of something that, say it's got a lot of oaks in the mid-story, and you want to get that going to get your pine stand going. That might be something where you can, other end of the spectrum, you can burn it in the spring, and you can light a fire such that it blows right with a head fire, into those areas where you don't have any concerns with it getting out, but you're able to, meet that ecological objective, really knocking back the oaks. It can be tricky to get that and not lose your desirable species. It's kind of like, you ever see that, I don't know if you call it a magic trick or a gag, but where they yank the tablecloth but leave all the dishes still on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Can you burn up those oaks but not kill your pine trees in the overstory? It's the same thing. So it's that's where that art comes in there of how you take all those conditions and put it together and come up with your desired end state.
Yeah, that's a really good way to think about it, is an art, and the experience, and leveraging the experience of others comes into play when you're trying to figure out how do you use fire to meet this specific objective and not simultaneously decrease success in some other objective.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a really cool point.
Yeah, that the whole idea of having patience is so hard when we do these fires. Yeah, and the whole peeling back the onion is right on. It's you may be faced with an ecological goal that's very challenging, and just the idea of this first fire is just may not do much. The second one and the third one and the fourth one, and it's yeah, having patience is hard sometimes when you're working with fire. You want to see the results right away, but
Right.
it does pay off.
Yeah. And then I'm sure you probably have some examples of this where you may have a place you're trying to restore to some ecological state, and you may have been working on it for your whole career to get it to that state, and
Yes.
you may still not be there. So, yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind. Is just because you light something on fire doesn't mean that everything is going to be hunky dory from then on. You have to continue to use fire, and you may not get to your target right away. It may take a while. So, really good points. And so, uh, before we end the episode, I think it's been really great to talk about some of these things, and things that I don't cover that often on here. I was just curious if you have any take home messages, whether it's for practitioners in the field, that are working in this line of work, or for private landowners, either one. Both are listening to this podcast. So, do you have any take home messages that you think are important to keep in mind, or we can just have a recap, even if you want, of what we talked about already?
I think one main take home really especially in Florida, but this applies everywhere. I go back to this idea of reaching out and learning from other practitioners, and don't be too quick to judge why you're using fire, what goals you have, but it's so important for us all to come together as a group of fire practitioners, and this starts from the students on to the folks in Florida that have been doing it for 5 generations. The fire, it's just so vital nowadays, especially in the we're not isolated like perhaps we once were, and so fire is obvious, fire is important, and everyone needs to reach out and try to learn from each other. And then one quick thing to add to Andy's thing about fire planning is, definitely think about contingency plans. Spend time when you plan your fires for whatever goals you have, is to think about what you'll do when it, gets out, or, just always think about those things, because you will become a better planner that way.
Yeah, it's really important. I think that's a good point. Something I try to embrace, in my own life as an educator. I am also a student, and you never get too old to learn. You can always take in knowledge from others and their experiences and what they're doing, and I think that's a really important message: is seek out those opportunities and don't be afraid to learn something from somebody.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, prescribed fire, it's an education in the field. The escape percentage of all controlled burns prescribed fire is very low. And I think one of those reasons is because we do that. We embrace this idea of trying to learn from people's experiences.
Yeah, I guess that's the spirit of this whole effort that we're engaged in right now with this podcast, is trying to take knowledge from people who've been doing this and studying it, and get it to people so they can learn about it. So, really like that take home. Andy, do you have anything that you wanted to add to it?
Yeah, I think just that the really cool thing about fire is it's a proactive thing. I'm also trained wildland firefighter, but that's a little bit more reactive. So when it's you're doing burning and controlled burning, it's a proactive thing. So you really do have that time to think through it and do things like that. And that's one of the really cool things that I think we've touched on with planning and partner building. But it's a little bit different mindset to the whole enterprise. And I guarantee you'll learn something. every time you do it. So that's another really, really cool part of it.
And really, really fun. I mean, my whole job is to learn basically and then teach people about it, right? So I love the idea that you just brought up is you can always learn something, and it's fun, right? It's fun to learn about it. It's fun to learn different things and get those stories from people. So before we leave, I did want to kind of, in that spirit of learning, let people know that we've given them plenty of examples of places that they can find information and seek out people to get that knowledge and experience. But you guys are also working on a project, right? That might provide them even another opportunity. So I just wanted to bring that up, that you guys are working on a podcast that I don't think is quite launched yet, right? But you will be launching pretty soon. What's the name of that?
So Marcus, thanks for mentioning that in the effort of sort of advertising each other's show. So it's called Fire Frequency, and
Fire Frequency.
And nice little pun, many ways there. And we really wanted to explore why people get into this business and talk to folks, and we want it to be educational and informative. But like we had mentioned earlier, I was going to do ants, and Andy, film school. It's we know so many people from so many backgrounds that are drawn to this profession, and fire ultimately is a great equalizer on the fire line. Fire doesn't care what politics you have, what gender, race. It doesn't. Fire is this chemical and natural process, and so it's intriguing why so many people are drawn to it. And so yes, we want to try to bring together a lot of different folks.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I'll certainly be listening in. It sounds really interesting, and definitely take a little different take on fire and fire ecology than we have on this show. So encourage the listeners to take a look at that when it's available as well. So I can't stress enough how much I appreciate you guys coming on to the show. I know you both have busy schedules and probably have some fires to light and fires to put out. So I appreciate you taking some time to talk to us about your experience with fire ecology, and hope we can have you guys on the show again sometime.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anytime.
Thanks, Marcus. Much appreciated. Yeah, anytime.
Thanks, guys. And we'll talk to you all later. Fire University is part of the Natural Resource University podcast network, funded by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you like what you heard today in this episode, please follow us on all the social media platforms at UF Deer Lab.